Welcome to Legislative Watch. As of the taping of this program, the 60th regular session of the Idaho State Legislature is winding down its second regular session and expects to sine die this week. This year, a number of bills were introduced, all surrounding the state sovereignty issue. From firearms protection to health care freedom, the legislature was sending a clear message to Congress that they would not participate in their unconstitutional insanity and they would not be bullied. My guest today is certainly no stranger to fighting for the Constitution. In fact, he's considered a champion of the Constitution, Congressman Ron Paul.
Thank you.
Dr. Paul, when I first met you back in 1988, Ronald Reagan had been elected to his second term, and I was very excited, but I was somewhat disillusioned over some of the infighting in the Republican Party and the fact that we just were having a difficult time. We see some of that happening today. How do you compare that?
Well, you have to think, the 80s were one time it was different than the 90s or the time when Bush was in charge, and now when the Republicans are out. So each one is different. The Congress wouldn't help Reagan as much as they could have. They could have pushed him harder than Reagan wouldn't have had to capitulate to the majority Democrats at the time. But then when Bush got in, and we had the House and the Senate, they both wimped out. Yeah. You know, Bush didn't give us much to go with, and the Republicans were willing to do anything that Bush told them to, and the litmus test was you got to be a team player and go along with the president. You cannot embarrass the president. Now, with Obama in, and we have a weak Republican representation in the Congress, actually the Republicans are doing better. But I think the real question now is the Republicans have stuck together and they have voted against Obamacare and a lot of other things that Obama wants. But what is bothersome to a lot of people in the country is, what are the Republicans going to be like if and when they get reelected? Right now they're doing well for two reasons. One, Obama is so bad, and the Republicans are doing better. But there's still this distrust factor, and that's why I think the Tea Party movement is so strong, the independent movement, people who have been burned too many times. So I like the way the Republicans are standing up right now compared to the past, but they still have to prove themselves, and hopefully we get a chance to do that again, you know, before the whole country's gone bankrupt on us.
Well, it is exciting to see how many people are now waking up, and more people seem to be listening to your message. It was interesting in '08 how the media was trying to marginalize you, and people are just coming out of the woodwork now saying, hey, a lot of the things he said makes a lot of sense to us now.
Yeah, I think so, and even you know, in the last year or so, certainly I've gotten more interviews in the mainstream media than I ever have before. But I think a couple things has happened. One is we've had this economic crisis that some of us have been worrying about for a long time, including you. You know, it just doesn't make sense that you can keep spending money like this. And when the financial crisis hit, the free market economists and those who preach free markets, as I have, we gained more credibility, and they were sort of desperate to hear something different. And at least when it's dealing with economic policy, we still have a long way to go to get the mainstream media to look at the whole picture of the Constitution. You know, they're concerned about the economy, but they're not really concerned about strictly adhering to the Constitution and protecting personal liberties. We still have a long way to go in that regard.
A lot of people seem to think that people take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, and then after that they just kind of ignore it.
From our viewpoint, that's exactly what they do. But if you listen to them carefully, they don't believe that's happening. If you listen to them, they say, well, you know, they obey the Constitution. It says that we're supposed to take care of the general welfare. And then they'll say, oh, the Interstate Commerce Clause gives us all this authority. They have no guilt whatsoever. They don't think they're violating their oath of office, but they don't know their history very well, because that is not what the Constitution says. It isn't, the Constitution doesn't exist to redistribute wealth. They don't understand the idea of, well, if that is the case, why did they list all the things we were permitted to do in Article 1, Section 8, and then said, that's it, folks, that's all you're allowed to do. Everything everything else is limited to the people and to the states. That's why they wrote the 9th and 10th Amendment, and they totally ignore this. So it's convenient for them to reinterpret the Constitution. But they've been conditioned that way. I mean, there's been a lot of teaching in the public educational system for decades to say, well, you don't want a Constitution that's overly rigid. You know, we want one that can be modernized. And there's room for that. That is amend the Constitution. It is too slow for them. So they do what they want out of convenience, but we have to keep doing what we're doing. And that's why this movement today on state sovereignty and nullification and 10th Amendment, Congress and the federal government can't fulfill their promises anymore. And we're getting only the burden, and we're in big trouble. So I think it's a very positive thing happening, that the grassroots are waking up and they're putting the feet to the fire of the members of Congress and saying, hey, look, this is what we say and this is what the Constitution does say. Why aren't you doing it?
Well, you know, you were talking about knowing our history and people catching on to things more and more. Certainly you've done a lot to help people understand the Fed, the issue with the Fed. How many people really understood before that it wasn't a government, part of government, that it was all privately done?
It was created by government, and then they let it go totally secret, and private individuals control it and run it and benefit from it. And again, it was the financial crisis that did that. You know, I've introduced that bill to audit the Fed over all these years and get about 12 people to sign on. But we have now every Republican, a bunch of Democrats, 317 co-sponsors. We passed it in the House. And that's because once the crisis hit and these TARP funds, everybody realized what a waste and fraud that was, and all the rich Wall Streeters and bankers were getting bailed out. Then when I and others started pointing out, well, you know, the Fed's involved in this too. They spent $2 trillion. They're off budget. They don't have to answer to anybody. And that's when the members of Congress didn't become so interested in monetary policy and the Constitution. What they heard were they got a message from their people back home, and that's why the grassroots once again woke up. Congress will respond if they hear enough from the people, and that should encourage all of us. I mean, it's really frustrating at times. People say, why don't they listen? Why don't they listen? Well, they don't listen if you're small in numbers, but if there's enough, they will listen. They have to listen. I think the final answer isn't in yet about medical care. It seemed like the majority of the people were trying to send a message to Washington, and yet it still got passed. So there's still a resolution there that has to be obtained, and we'll wait and see what happens. But the system can work if the people really let the government know what they want. It doesn't happen instantaneously. It takes a longer time than most people like. But generally speaking, the government reflects what the people want. The people, over the last 3, 4, 5 decades, they accept the idea of welfare. They accept that you have a right to education, you have a right to a job, and you have a right to be taken care of, and you have a right to food stamps and all these things. But that's now being challenged, and I see some good things happening right now.
Seems like there's a lot of confusion between entitlement and rights.
Entitlement sounds like a right, doesn't it? You know, I'm entitled to this, but that's not a concept of right. And if that's probably a basic issue that has to be resolved. So if the majority of the American people think they have a right to it, then that endorses everything that they're doing. But if it's explained that you don't, that every time if an individual has a right to something and it comes from government, then the government, since it can't give you real rights, all they can do is give you stuff. They have to take something from somebody else to give it to the other person, which means they have violated that right. So when rights become services and material benefits, they violate rights. It's the whole idea of having a right to something is a violation of rights more so than it's a right.